Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Office Hours live stream. Today, we are talking about running a research readout, and it's my great joy to introduce to you all Krista Simon, a UX researcher here, a UX research manager here at Figma. She has led probably hundreds of research readouts at this point and has brought lots of great advice to you. And I feel so lucky to work with her and so lucky to be chatting with her today. So, Krista, thank you for being here. Over to you.
Amazing. And what an intro. Can I just end on that note?
Absolutely
Um,
not.
thank you so much, Katie. And thank you all so much for being here today. I'm super excited. Like Katie said, I've been through it with many styles, many different types, success, not successful with different readouts. So I'm excited to share, discuss, and answer any questions surrounding this favorite topic of mine, research readouts, with you all. I know that one size obviously does not fit all, especially in a world where we are often hybrid. Some people are fully remote, some are in the office, or maybe you're on the beach. I don't know. But the points I really want to share are hopefully more universal in our lessons I've been burned with in the past. So hopefully I can ease you all of some pain in your future. But before we dive in, I thought I'd share some additional context around my road to even just sharing this information with you all today. So I actually started my career in research in academia, like probably a lot of you researchers on this call. I was in a PhD program writing like 37 plus page journal articles, going back and forth with peer reviewers, and just hoping and crossing my fingers one day that somebody might even actually read it. Ultimately, I truly despise this part of the research. I've never loved writing long docs and became really burnt out of writing, to be honest, and ultimately dropped out. So here we are. I then found myself at my first tech company where I quickly learned writing my findings was a very different process than in academia. I'll never forget my very first manager telling me, well, it's okay to sound a little more human in my research reports. And it stuck with me. It's super important to be human. We're talking about humans. And I also learned that it's okay to step outside like the literal box of a deck, even though we're going to be focusing on slide decks today, to get a bigger impact. This top right picture you can maybe see here is I was standing in front of the main doors of our building and getting people as they were coming in just to listen to the research that I had. And you might even see a familiar face in the very background standing, which was Katie. We go
That's
way.
me.
It is. I was feeling really good about my research readout capabilities until I landed at Figma in 2020. One, everyone was remote all of a sudden. It was COVID times. And two, all decks were created in Figma design. And I had zero design chops and learned how to use Figma by actually having to put slides together in Figma design. I'm sure some of you can relate there. And I actually found a screenshot of my very first research readout deck, which I made in the bottom right. Some might think or consider it to be minimalist. I just think I just didn't have the skill sets needed. And when FigJam launched in 2021, I was like, oh my goodness, all of my problems are solved. FigJam is super easy. I can interact with the audience, which was what I was craving being in an office. And I also felt really confident kind of designing and spiffing up my readout in FigJam. However, I really struggled and felt like I was losing the impact of the research with every research readout I was creating in FigJam. I couldn't drive impact beyond my product team, and often insights got left behind or often forgotten. But don't get me wrong, huge FigJam fan and user. It's really been game changing, but just not for formal research readouts. Really where FigJam shines is when you're brainstorming, synthesizing with your team. I do all of my debriefs with my team in FigJam, collaborating on observations or even workshopping your narrative arc of the presentation with your manager in FigJam. And I've noticed that when I've had my research readouts in FigJam, they just don't have the staying power like a deck does. This is because it's meant to feel like an ephemeral whiteboard, right? And so additionally, research readouts need to also work in an asynchronous way. And often FigJam files consisting of a lot of data that I might have can be overwhelming, especially around wayfinding around the file, especially with some executives. And since we've launched Figma Slides, it's been pretty incredible to see a shift in not only the virality now that our research readouts have, but how we craft and describe the insights has really greatly improved as well as a team. So that's been incredibly exciting to see. All right, so I just shared some challenges I faced. I'm super curious what you've all experienced, and hopefully we can touch on some of those today.
Thanks,
Amazing.
Krista.
Yes. Yeah, engaging stakeholders for sure. Looks like, yes. Okay, providing actionable insights that we will dive way deep on. Summarizing data. This is great, y'all. We're pretty confident in creating visuals. That's amazing because I will not be spending a ton of time on that. Just some touching. But yeah, providing actionable insights and engaging stakeholders. Perfect. So let's dive into some of those. So I have 5 guidelines I really like to focus on and we'll be going through in more detail throughout this presentation. So one being always ladder up to the business opportunity and objective, even if you're doing like a micro research project. And if you're not familiar with what your business opportunity or objective might be, talk to your PM, your managers to get really crisp on what it is you're even marching towards in your research. If you don't start at the top there, there's a lot of holes that might happen as you're going through your research questions. So we'll dive into that. 2, don't feel the need to show your work. This took me a lot of time, especially coming out of academia, where it's all about proving yourself, proving the data. And really in our world here, it's more around telling a story, getting people to buy into what you're telling them. And so put those gory details in the appendix or just even simply leave out. Keeping it simple is key. 3, describe key findings and recommendations up front. This has been a new one on our research team that we've been implementing where we have an executive summary that goes right in the top 3 slides. So we'll dig into that too. And this is really helpful, especially for async shareouts where people just want to read that important information. 4, clearly articulate your observations, insights, and recommendations. I can't stress this one enough. Threading the needle between your observation, your insight, and recommendation is the most important thing you can do to getting your insights actioned on. The other thing I will call out, and I'll be pushing on throughout the rest of this, is actually lean in and have a point of view on what the team should do now as part of your recommendations. And 5, use diagrams, visualizations, and metaphors to actually convey the insights. Think outside the box, play around with things, work with teammates to see, hey, does this Venn diagram make sense to you? And just try new things. It's not going to hurt. But what will hurt is if you just have a wall of text. I thought it'd be most fitting to actually walk you through these with an actual template that we use on our research team at Figma. It's also in the community, so I'll be sure to share that link. And this was made by Marcus on our research team, who is way better at designing slides than I am. So major shout out to him for this awesome template. All right, just starting things off, your title slide. This might feel super obvious, but it's truly amazing how many times I've come across research readout decks that actually don't have this context up front. And when you're putting things in your research repository, your library, it's really important to have this information to be able to give it context when people are going through it, hopefully 2 years out. So yeah, it's really important. Make sure you have at least the quarter and the year, who the researcher was, what team you were on, and the title, obviously. Okay, so business opportunity. We put this right up front. Your work should always be rooted in a business objective. Demonstrate it from the start. Even on the rapid research team here, we're always focused on tactical research questions. We still ladder up to a business objective and opportunity. So it doesn't need to be some like, it's not a big, meaty strategic project. It doesn't matter. You all should be laddering up to these goals. So here I have an example. I made it into a Mad Lib style, if you will, where it's pretty typical. The objective is broad and strategic of the company, focusing on enhancing the company's long-term customer relationships and loyalty, which all will hopefully gain more adoption, right? And so it's really important to break this down as a researcher and tie these, what I call like key ingredients of the business opportunity. So we're talking like the metric goal, you can see up there, 25% increase in the adoption rate, into how you actually shape your research goals and your questions. And so it's important to articulate what you'll be measuring. So when you're working with your research goal, right, around what was in the business opportunity in your research goals and how you'll measure as part of your research questions. So now you're telling a more clear story that starts with that business objective, how the research aims to support the business objective by providing clear research questions of how you're going to do it and how you're going to actually measure it. This really breaks down into three main reasons as to why this actually matters as a research readout. Alignment. This ensures that your research goals actually align with the business objectives and guarantees that the research is relevant and impactful. Focus. So clear research goals help in maintaining focus for the team, ensuring scope doesn't creep up on the research and that you're all aligned on the design of the project. And then actionability, which is probably one of the most important things as a researcher, is that your research is tied to business objectives, is more likely to result in an actionable insights that can drive meaningful change and improvement. We love to see that. All right, so one of the other biggest mistakes that I see researchers doing or in research readouts is that they feel like they have to show all their work. You don't. Keep the methodology simple. We're talking like, what was the relevant time frame that you had to do? Was there a deadline that was important to know? Did it inform a roadmap? So just highlighting those moments versus really getting into the detail of a detailed timeline. No one cares. They're here to hear your readout, and that's that. The other thing is around target audience. I think this is interesting, right? To call out exactly who your target audience was. Were you talking to decision makers? How many designers did you talk to? That's pretty interesting for the team as they're going through your insights to have in the back of your mind. The last one being the mode that you use. So is it a survey? How many categories? What types of categories did you include? Again, just thinking around building context, not so much showing your work and proving you had the right amount of data. Next is around including a slide for the executive summary, right? This is what I said is a newer process for our research team at Figma. And I think it's probably the best thing we've implemented in quite some time. And it's really critical because it provides a concise overview of key insights and recommendations. It also ensures that busy stakeholders who are just scanning through your deck asynchronously can quickly grasp the main findings and their implications. This also really helps me when I write a TLDR to share in Slack or in an email with the team. So it's nice just to have it all pretty consistent in that way too. Also, in my experience, if you have more than 3 core themes, we're talking high level themes, there's probably some that are weaker or that might be best suited in an appendix or condensed together, right? So really push yourself in thinking about 3 themes as your stance going forward. Okay, quick pause. I'm curious for you all to answer, how much do you agree with the following statement? I'm very confident turning research insights into actionable recommendations. Get some more votes before I reveal. Oh, nice. Okay. We're all across the board. I love that because we are going to dive into how to make those more actionable. So here we go. That's awesome. Gosh, I love polls. Okay. So breaking up your deck into categories also might seem like a duh, but it's important. And I think about it not so much of, yes, for the hierarchy of information, it is obviously important, but I truly use these as intentional pauses for either audience engagement or just better wayfinding, right? But I like to just take a pause, check with the camera on Zoom, see if anyone's still listening, and potentially use polls at this level for an asynchronous way of seeing who has got to this section. So play around with these sections. They don't just have to serve the purpose of better hierarchy in your deck. All right, so this is pretty simple also, but you'll want to tease up the insights you're about to dive into. Numbers are super, super helpful to guide the next few slides and set more clear expectations as well. And spoiler, this is the most important slide that we're going to go through, I think, and often the hardest to get right, as we saw in the poll, right? It is really important, like I mentioned earlier, to thread the needle between what was observed, what people should care about, and what you think should happen next. So to really get in the weeds, because the weeds matter here, I often find people conflating an observation versus an insight, right? And so the other thing I also see is maybe one slide is just all observation. The next slide is all insights, or the next slide is all recommendation. It's really hard to follow along in that way. And I've been burned so many times by trying to be cute in that way. So just really just give it a header even to let people know exactly what you're telling them. I literally do this for all of my decks. So the weeds, observations. This is what actually happened. What was observed? This should be factual based of what was seen, heard, or measured during the research. An insight explains why the observed behavior occurred and what it implies for the product or the user experience. So what should your company care about this? I always will write a post-it as I'm going through my synthesis around so what, so what, so what? Why should the head of product actually care about this information that you're telling them? And then finally, your recommendation, which I recently heard is like the now what, which I love. This is always important to actually have a point of view. So what should the team do about this information? I see a lot of on the rapid research team because we're in such a visual space where we're mocking up things, it might not look great, but it's to try and convey what is actually needed in terms of changes to the product and be specific. I think in the beginning of my career, I would always shy away from telling the team what they should do. They literally have this research so that they can understand what they should do next. So tell them that. And I always used to do a bunch of how might we's, right? Ditch those. We don't need to exercise around how might we do this and that. Just if you have clear conviction, lean into it and be straight up in your recommendation. Biggest tips for you all there. So here's an example of what this could actually look like. You can see the observation. It was a survey, so 60% of users abandoned the sign-up process. The insight is more clear around like, this could lead to higher abandonment rates. Like that as an executive, we don't want that happening because if we think about our objective, we want to increase adoption by 25%. So if we have this, that's not great. And then your actual recommendation. The next thing I just want to touch on is around using diagrams and visualizations to convey insights. And I have a couple more real life examples too. But you can see this isn't a perfect bar chart, right? It's also not a screenshot where it gets really grainy from your survey tool that you might be using. It's okay for it to not be perfect. It's really just trying to emphasize that the survey for reason number 2 came in mid or whatever you're trying to convey, right? And so I think it's just really important to ease up on how critical we need to be with these kind of bar charts or surveys that come out because you're trying to articulate the sentiment around it, right?
We have a great point from Vicky that I want to bring into the conversation here,
Yeah.
Krista. So Vicky says, I think how might we's and conviction can go hand in hand. They aren't mutually exclusive. It's important to have a point of view and involve the team in the problem-solving process as well. Important for buy-ins. So Krista, you just mentioned don't put how might we's there in the recommendation. Can you talk a little bit about where you recommend
Yes,
involving
that's a
those?
great point, Vicky. I tend to have a debrief that is more fluid and in FigJam with the core team. And that's where I create my how might we's. And then we all tend to riff on the actual recommendation. And that helps in a lot of different ways. But one being engineers are on that call and they can actually give feasibility to some of the recommendations that I'll end up giving in my final report. But 100% having those how might we's in a brainstorm, early synthesis is critical to bringing the team along. Design
Explanation. Thanks
spikes
so
are
much.
also great areas for doing that. If you're thinking about like high level kind of strategy areas and opportunity sizing, so you can pull in some things there before even kicking off the research. Cool. Great
Fantastic.
question.
Yes. Love that. We also have one more from Mara that's specific to the slide we're looking at here in the charts
Okay.
and graphs. They're curious how you're creating these since you mentioned no grainy screenshots. Are they using Figma slides? What are you using to build your
Figma
charts and
slides, of
diagrams?
course. Marcus, I can't take credit for creating this one. Marcus created this one. But given that boxes and lines and text are so much easier in Figma slides than it was in Figma design for a non-designer like myself, we've just been creating them in here.
And I will say, Mara, I linked out to that template that Marcus had built and is on the community. You can copy that and you can see how Marcus created it and like even use that as a template to build your own charts.
Yeah, he has had quite a few different ways of representing data in there too. So hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely helpful. Thanks,
Cool.
Krista.
Awesome. All right, another spicy one. I've got another spicy one. Quotes. It's controversial. Put them away. Unless they really pack a big punch in order to make the slide stand out or to truly help your argument, it should really come across in the insights, in the recommendations that you have of what you're trying to really push for. So the more conviction you have, and kind of ownership in those previous slides, it's more important than having a quote. I think there's many times where I even had a structured readout where it's like a splash of customer voice. And I just went through, right, 5 slides of just like this, a participant quote. And it really just hit executives of, oh, this is painful. Oh, this is painful, to try and convey and get them into more of an empathetic mindset before I dove into the insights. So that's like a way that you can do it. But I think when you have a slide that's just people aren't reading those, even if you're bolding things, that often even makes it harder to read. So I really think you need to be very strategic around the quotes that you use, and they should almost be just at this length, nothing longer, because it really just, you lose your audience in that way. Hot take, but here we are. Okay, moving along. Last but not least, always tie back to that business objective and the recommendations for achieving that opportunity, right? So here we have the business objective, big and bold up front. And in order to achieve this, we need to do these 3 things that you recommended. And so it really just ties in the impact and the importance of the research that you did, and gives the team like really tactical ways to start to scratch the surface of achieving that business opportunity. So a quick and easy way to do it. Yeah. And that's always how I typically end. It's a good way to like also summarize and remind people of your findings. But yeah, I have some real life examples of particular research readout slides that have had a lasting power. Some I've created, some my teammates have created, and obviously some information has been redacted. So apologies there, but I have a question first. So what format do you prefer for presenting research readouts? Curious here. I tend to miss having more of a live share out, but those also are a little harder to last because unless they're recorded. So slides tend to be my preference. Okay, cool. Seems to be everyone's preference. And I'm hoping you guys are all thinking Figma slides, right? There we go. Okay. Okay, this has been a staple framework for how I share recommendations at Figma. This kind of helps to articulate the priorities in order with framing up what I have as like my spice level. It also started a bit of my own branding by doing this, but it'll help like truly give like just a straight up list of priorities for the team to run with. I tend to work very closely with the product manager or designer or eng lead when creating this to make sure it's feasible. I like to have some kind of a framework that goes with those like chili peppers, if you will. So one being like, okay, how severe is the problem? Meaning, how frequent is it happening? Is it a big surface area where this might be happening? And then what's like the level of customer size that is also hitting this problem? So there's some loose math there around giving it some prioritization ranking. Recently, Nanurl on my rapid research team gave a presentation of our insights and included this awesome metaphor using Yelp to describe the difference of 2 different sites that we have. And instead of just describing the jobs to be done for each, she used this, which was so fun. And so metaphors really make insights stick and lighten up the room when you're feeling like you're just presenting at people sometimes too. This got a lot of buzz, which was fun to see. For example, this was really trying to tell at Wendy's, you can tell when Wendy's themselves has posted on Yelp versus when you go to Yelp, you want to see more authentic pictures like the one on the right. I think it's the Fry Baconator. Not so appealing this early in the morning, but it was a great way to demonstrate that information. Also, sometimes the type of research that we might do, especially on the rapid research team, that's more tactical in nature. You want to demonstrate sentiment without getting too bogged down in the details. And so one little trick I do is I just use an emoji to go through the funnel of the holistic sentiment that the customers had versus just quote, and just generalize it in this way. And then at the bottom there, I'll leave like a caption in case somebody is viewing the deck asynchronously. And then I always pull in data to describe the funnel as well. Again, charts, they don't need to be perfect. If somebody asks you for the error bar, you can give that to them in your raw data file, right? But I think when you're trying to present and convey information, it's really important just to demonstrate the impact of the data versus just sharing a screenshot again of your chart from your survey tool. And this one I like to include maybe like a quote or 2 around why. There might have been more negative sentiment because that's obviously where your stakeholders are going to want to pay the most attention and double click into. So just trying to get ahead of that is a great way to do that. Okay, I think last example I have, researchers love a 2x2, but also stakeholders love them too. I find that 2x2 frameworks are really helpful for readouts because they provide a clear and concise way to actually categorize and prioritize these findings. So making complex data more digestible and highlighting these key insights and strategic directions more at a glance. And I even use this if I then like double clicked into Social Butterfly and had like its own slide around a little more details. So choose your own adventure in that way. This is an oldie but a goodie. All right, so here are the 5 tips to start that we walked through. Again, remember, always ladder up to the business opportunity or objective. Don't feel the need to show all of your work. Describe key findings and recommendations up front. Clearly articulate your observations, insights, and recommendations. Just label them. Make it easy on yourself. And use diagrams, visualizations, and metaphors to convey those insights. But what I really want you all to remember today, though, is to trust yourself. I think this is the thing I try and tell every researcher I come across who might be a little more nervous or less confident going into their readout is you're the person who have spent the hours and hours in interviews. You scoured the data. You've made sense of it all. So truly trust yourself, trust your instincts, and turn this readout really into a celebration of what I really try and go into that mindset into each readout where it's like exciting to share all of the data that's been synthesized and have actual recommendations for the team to go off in action is, I think, the best part of what we do. So really celebrate the moment. I always tell my team too, after a readout, go take a nap, go celebrate with Chick-fil-A or something. I don't know, like it's a big moment. And so lean into that and trust yourself. Okay.
There we go. Looks like I loved that you had some spicy takes in there. If folks want to vote on their favorites, one of
Right.
my favorites was show your work because I feel like you have the tendency to want to do that. And we have a question actually from someone that we'll
Right.
get into in a minute, but that one felt a little spicy. Love the spicy input about quotes. And we had a question from Matthew right before you mentioned about quotes. I'm like, where should you add quotes? Do you feel the need to add quotes? And so that was I feel like a spicy take as well.
Indeed.
Show your work seems to be a favorite as well as clearly articulate observations. And yeah, that what, so what, and now what, Krista, is a great framework.
Yeah, I saw
Awesome.
Bezod posted, he called on Twitter, I think, around the now what, which I hadn't heard like rephrase, and I was like, ooh, I like this little
Yeah,
way to describe it. But yeah, it's
yeah,
so critical.
got a
Cool.
ring to. Okay, so we have some questions coming in. With that, Krista, we'll dig in with the first question from Mara. Mara had another question we already talked about, but they're bringing lots of questions today. And this one is, if you use multiple modes such as a survey, interviews, usability tests, do you mention all of those or just those that were insightful?
Yeah, so if we go back up, I just write here multi-method. So I might write 3 methods or yeah,
Mm,
multi-method up here and then describe what you did. That's something really to celebrate and a lot of work when you do that. So you should definitely call that out. That's a great question.
great. And then we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Not sure who wrote this, but they're talking about they always feel like they have insights that are related to other topics and they feel like they're correlated, which is why they want to explain them together. They're curious on your take of should they just have one simple insight or explain the rationale that explains how different topics are related to that insight.
I think if the relation across will drive towards that like business opportunity, like one to one, then for sure include that. But often it's a really good thing to have in the appendix. If you think
Mm,
about who your audience is for this level of a readout, it's typically like executives, stakeholders. And so I think it's really important to get those like simple, tactical type of, not tactical, but like simple, actionable insights right off the bat
mm.
that are like the most important, and then to have that backlog and in the appendix for the whole team to always to reference moving forward. So appendix is totally, it's not just a graveyard, right? Think of the appendix as truly more information for those that want it and need to go through it all. Cool.
Fantastic. Love that. Okay, great. We have a next question from Matthew. And Matthew asks, you mentioned your process earlier about reviewing some of your findings first with the core team and then doing this type of larger research readout. Curious to hear what context you have these research readouts and when you have something more informal. So maybe you can talk about that end-to-end process.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty bullish. So my whole process, just to get into it, because I think it's helpful, is
Yeah.
let's say I have a 45-minute research interview. I make my calendar block for the team an hour so that then after the 45 minutes, we do like a mini debrief with each other in that 15-minute space. So after each session, the team and I are going through around, are we getting the right information? What are we hearing? Are we answering our research questions? How? And a lot of that time is happening in FigJam, the note taking. And so from there, once I get into, okay, we've completed all of our sessions, let's say, I will workshop with the team in like a casual, informal debrief where I'm like, okay, here's the questions we had. Here's what I'm thinking are some of the answers. So not even like theming things up yet. And then we'll like sense make of the data together in that way. It is the way that I've had the most success in getting the research to have an impact is by having the team like go through this whole process with you. And it's not to say it's so much work, but it's important for them to understand too. Like we are facilitators of this information. We're not gatekeepers. And so it's important to bring them along. And so that's where I have that like more informal kind of readout, if you will, but I call it just a team debrief before we open it up to stakeholders that might have a good touch point with this or executives that should know this information, because then that also helps me craft like what the narrative is. I also use that time to see what sticks with people, especially the PM or an engineer around, ooh, what felt interesting there? I saw you perk up, or you have a lot of questions here. This is probably messy and I need to like dig into this more. So it's super, super critical to have those moments with your team.
I love that. So you have to think about all of the stakeholders and how to bring them in along at different points of the process.
100%. It
Thank you.
is literally our job.
For sure. Thank you for walking us through that. We have a tactical question here. And Matthew asked a similar question earlier. I mentioned about quotes and videos. Nora asked a similar question here. What are your thoughts around sound clips or just a short video of a user saying a quote? People really want quotes, Krista.
I know, I did
What should
too.
people do with their quotes?
I know. I think that there's like a couple things. I typically will never have a research call where there's just even 5 of us on the call. It's typically 5 or more, right? And so if the team is embedded in hearing the information themselves, like that will go so far if you can get them to come, and that could be a whole nother talk. But I think like getting them to be part of the story is key to driving this empathy that people often try to do through sound clips or quotes, right? I think I used to do at Asana, I did what we called chips and clips. I don't know if you remember that, Katie,
I
but we
do.
would have a snack time at 3 o'clock and I'd play a highlight reel in the cafe while everyone ate chips. And it was really great for like branding and just like this continuous learning that people were having. So I think in those kind of settings, it's great. I find it pretty challenging in a readout itself to then like switch gears and then have audio. There's always something that doesn't work, I feel. And so I personally just don't have a lot of confidence in that. I also think that as you build up your skill set in having more confidence yourself in the conviction of your insights, in the clarity that you'll provide, that in and of itself will be enough. I think where video clips are super powerful or is if your team can't come to sessions, like giving them snippets along the way is huge. So that I think is like 10 out of 10 would recommend as you're going through your sessions to shoot off those little teasers for sure.
I love that. There's
Keep
lots
going.
of avenues to share out
Yes.
information. So
Yeah.
your quotes
I
will
think,
not be lost, but
yeah,
just be cognizant of the audience in these readouts.
I love
Great
that.
advice.
Yeah, I think that's a good point though, Katie, is it should never just be here's all the information in the readout and it's everyone on your team's first time understanding this information. It could be the stakeholders' first time, but it should never be the team's first time of hearing this information.
Absolutely. And also keep those in the appendix. And then if someone asks, what, tell me exactly what people are saying about this. You have them at your fingertips. You can bring in those
Yeah,
quotes if you need them. Yeah.
100%, Katie.
Great. We have some great best practices questions. The first one here from Carolyn. They're asking any more storytelling tips to bring the deck to life. So we talked about Figma slides, bringing it to life. Chris, how are you doing that? They lean on quotes, but interested if you have other ideas of visuals that can really help bring your story to life.
For sure. I think frameworks are huge. A 2x2, a scale. A lot of our team will do, especially when comparing across different use cases, journey maps. Like there's so many different ways to actually articulate what you're trying to get across that might be more visual. So I would really try and kind of start there, but frameworks are huge. I think even demonstrating from like best in class. So what tool have you used that actually does have a great onboarding experience? Like literally just walk the company through that and explain why and why it relates to what you found. You don't have to really reinvent the wheel too much there. I think also I love with Figma slides that obviously the like polls, getting people engaged in that way. But I think more in terms of like storytelling tips, I think, yeah, the frameworks, adding more visuals, screenshots even of their experience. Teams literally, I sometimes like quilt screenshots together for them of what does their homepage actually look and feel like? What does their sidebar look like? That truly drives like the realism home versus like somebody a quote explaining that it's confusing when they go into their sidebar. Like show versus telling is way more, it will give you way more leverage.
We have a few tactical questions following up
Okay.
on that. This one is from an anonymous attendee asking, in the one that you were showing, the example you were showing, the observation is more emphasize the insight, but they find that execs care more about the so what. What's your take on what you're highlighting, what you're putting at the forefront here?
Totally. Yeah, you can play around with that. I played around with it on two different slides. But yeah, I think it's important just to play around with the kind of hierarchy and don't feel like one is better than the other, but just having labels I have found is helpful. So yeah, I didn't love the one I had of like it being bold on the left, but you can have it just on the left banner be like theme one and then break the three different things out on the right. Or you can switch it. I always tell one of my teammates, no, I'm always like, ooh, switch that insight to be the bigger thing on the left. You're bearing the lead. So yeah, totally agree with that. Great call out.
Yes, great call out. And then the other tactical question we had is around tooling. Chris, so you mentioned FigJam as one tool, Figma Slides, of course, is the other. Any other tools that you can speak to that you're using as part of the process?
Yeah, we heavily use Great Question as our form of our research panel for people to sign up. So we dip into that for finding participants to talk to, scheduling them. It's also where all of our session videos live, which makes it like super accessible for our teammates who might have missed a session to jump in there and find it. So those are the main stacks of what we use. I'm not using prototypes in Figma and co-creating in Figma is the beauty of working at Figma. We're talking to Figma users, so doing all of that in Figma is best for the research that we do.
Awesome. Thank you for digging into that. And we have a great question now
Oh
speaking about
yeah.
best practices on the afterwards of measuring impact. So how do you measure the potential impact of a recommendation?
This needs to be its own talk, but it is such a good question. So on the rapid research team, we do a couple things. So we literally send out a survey because we're a little bit more of a at a service for the company. So people
Yeah.
request our time. And so we will send out a survey after to our requesters or stakeholders around what happened with the data, satisfaction, timing, expectations. I think every research team could be doing that. So then when you go into your review cycles or you're doing a retro at the half of the year, we totally ladder all that information up. And then we also ladder up. I have a question in there around what business objective did this impact? And so we have a list of all of that. So you can do it qualitatively in that way, and it works really well. I think that's why I love having those summary slides where it's here were all my recommendations, the opportunities, things like that, because then you can just follow up with the team around that list. And that's like your own checklist moving forward. Research tends to have some lag unless you're doing more tactical research. So just keeping in tabs with the team and the stakeholders and checking in if you're not embedded is the best way to do it. But if you have that
Fantastic.
business objective, you can always ladder it back to the business impact, which is huge. Yeah.
And again, so much more to dig into there, but thanks for the
Yeah.
recommendations. And Mihak is on a roll here. We have another great question. This one's a bit of a long one, but I think the gist of this is about, do you ever have to go back and revisit a research readout? What happens afterwards if you need to iterate on this or other things come up? How do you think about iterating on research readouts or these insights that happen, recommendations that happen afterwards?
Totally. I think that's where I try and catch it in that like informal debrief more is where
Mm,
the iteration really happens. I try and tell the team that like if your core team has the information to move forward via that debrief, that's important because then you can spend more time getting the like exact messaging right for when you have this more like bigger stakeholder meeting because the team is often just like running with what you've shared with them, right? They already know what needs to be done. So that's like a good kind of hack, if you will, of doing that. And then, yeah, I think you just go back and you can make an edit. You can duplicate the slide and share like a bar that says like edited since readout or anything like that. One thing that we do as part of the team that launched slides, we were tracking metrics along the way in the month after launch. And so we just kept like a running list of ongoing insights week over week in one single deck, which was really helpful. So instead of going back and changing numbers, we just like added more slides.
love that. Thanks for speaking to that. We have another question from Mara here about you mentioned user persona or influencer personas in classic of user personas. Can you just maybe share more about how you think about archetypes or personas?
Yes. I don't love personas. I think they're really great for marketing and if there needs to be a go-to-market strategy. So that's what that was. And that was for our community of design influencers. Not so much a shift on the user persona versus a influencer persona. We just called it an influencer, design influencer. So yeah, I think their personas are really great for marketing and go-to-market strategies. I think a little less helpful on the product side because there's just so many different types of use cases and needs that we're aiming for. But yeah, that's my
And
other
then
spicy thing.
other thing, yeah, lots of spicy takes. Follow up on this. Maybe you can speak a little bit to their question here about like when you click on that, what types of information are you putting together? Back on that last question
Oh yeah.
about the persona, what types of information do you have
Oh,
available for
yes, yes,
people
yes.
to reference?
Yes, great question. Thanks, Katie. So,
Yeah,
if you double clicked on Social Butterfly, I always have
yeah,
like their goals, their motivators, what roles they might be in. For this one, it was like, what platforms are they sharing and what types of content are they sharing? I think that was the gist of the framing, but always like goals, motivators, why you should care as a company, things like that. Yeah.
awesome. Thanks, Krista.
Yeah.
Next question from Anonymous and Henry. Do you have any additional advice to a research team of one? I know
Yeah.
this is a very general question, but any thoughts you can share here for smaller research teams?
Yeah, I think just like making sure you're truly answering the most critical things. As a team of one, you're going to get a lot of asks. And I think just making sure you're connecting with the leadership at your company to ensure you're aligning any research goal or question to what actually matters to the business at that in that moment. That will help you really scope things out. I have a full document around how Rapid Research Team prioritizes research. So if anyone feels bummed because you can't take on their research, like just pointing them to a document tends to really help around why you're prioritizing in certain ways. So would recommend that. But yeah, I've never been a team of one. I've been a team of two. So go you, go.
You can do this. Love that. Great. We have two more questions here, and we're coming up on time, so we'll try to get these two. And this one from Samson: tendency to show your work is around gaining credibility for people to trust the insights. How do you think about gaining that credibility without feeling the need to show your work?
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about a lot when creating this, to not try and sound entitled with, I know there's a place you have to start as a researcher for sure, and showing your work is one way of doing that. I think there are just like different avenues of sharing your work along the way that doesn't all happen in a deck. So like I mentioned, sharing out teaser clips along the way is a great way. And people are even hearing some of your facilitation skills in that, sharing out data tidbits that you might have in the survey. A lot of where you gain that credibility is upfront. It's aligning on your research questions, aligning on the goals, aligning on your discussion guide. I remember starting out, I was always so anxious about people reading my guide, but it's only going to make it better and only going to make people be tied into it and sign off on things along the way so that when it does come to this kind of like final showcase, it's not net new information and everybody's been along the way for your methodology. So there shouldn't be any like out of left field comments because they've been brought along. So always find the person who might be most skeptical and like handhold information with them is always key. Hopefully that's
Love that.
helpful.
I lied, we got one more question coming in. So this
Um,
one is hopefully a quick one from Gavin. How do you think about synchronous versus async readouts and shareouts?
Yeah, this is a big one. I think, especially as a company that's hybrid or just any, is you have to think about it always as like asynchronous, but to not blow up your slides. And I think this is like an avenue where Figma Slides is going to be dipping more into, but like I tend to use my speaker notes as additional context for them. And so make sure that looks good and is crisp because that also they can follow along in your speaker notes as well. You can also leave like comments in the deck to help add more color for somebody who's asynchronous. We have a few researchers who will do Loom recordings of them going through the deck, which is also really helpful. Record your share out for them to see. But I think it's really important to always consider the asynchronous read of your deck because that's ultimately what's going to be on the shelf for people to read and pick up later on.
Absolutely. And we'll end
Yeah.
with this one from Clara. You mentioned how you try to make your research more human. Do you have any recommendations on how to do that?
Yeah, so my fun human way is the memoji, which kind of just makes people laugh and also just it's ridiculous, but it also feels human in that way. I think that sharing actual screenshots as per NDA and things like that around what customers provide for you is also like a really humanized way of what literally their experience is like. So those are like that. And I think just like the way you represent the data should always be in a humanized way, if that makes sense. Like you're representing all of the voices that you heard. And so I think it's important to like take ownership of that and feel compelled, right? If you're compelling when you talk about it, that in and of itself is like a more human approach.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Krista. Thank you so much for all of
Thank
these
you, everyone.
insights
These
and all
questions
of
are great.
they were fantastic. This was such a great discussion. We really appreciate you sharing these useful guidelines and also all of your advice for all of these great questions. You can follow up with Krista. I think, Krista, where's the best place to reach you if folks want to get in touch?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active there. And then on Twitter, I'm Krista underscore UXR, obviously. CH, yeah.
So, obviously. Great. Find Krista on LinkedIn or X. With that, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for bringing these incredible questions, especially Mara and Mihak and all of you who brought all of these wonderful questions today. Krista, thank you so much for being here and sharing all these wonderful advice to everybody and for teaching us all about running research readouts.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This was so fun.
Great. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Bye.